And I certainly want to thank you for your invitation to be with you this afternoon. See, it's nice to be amongst friends. That might seem a strange thing for an Anglican priest to say in this location, but I probably have more friends, or at least kindred spirits, amongst Unitarians, Sea of Faith members, rationalists, and humanists than I probably do amongst my Christian colleagues. I understand their problem with me, and don't judge them harshly for it. That at first I'm a non-theist makes me incomprehensible when I also claim to be a Christian. Yes, Sally, it's okay. What kind of Christian doesn't believe in an external father figure God, rejects creedal claims about the divinity of Jesus, and has a love-hate relationship with the church that pays his stipend? My answer is this kind. Many, if not most Christians, understand their faith to be about subscribing to historically agreed upon creedal statements. There is a much smaller subset of Christians, of which I am one, that believes faith is about ethical living rooted in finding our better selves and higher purpose. We are more interested in questions than answers. Our faith strives on its uncertainties. We reject the notion that faith is about believing impossible things. I'm with Alice when she told the Queen of Hearts, "There is no use trying," she said. "One can't believe impossible things." The Queen responds much like the Church has over 2 millennia. "I dare say you haven't had much practice. When I was younger, always did it for half an hour a day. Why, sometimes I've believed as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast." Certainly one of the most difficult problems many of my faith have with me is the fact that I don't see secularism as the enemy of faith, and my strong belief that in human affairs it's important to keep the church and the state separate. Too many people of faith, secular is a dirty word. I suppose we have Plato to thank for that. His dualistic view, described best in his parable of the cave, would have us believe that the world known to our senses is a mere corruptible shadow of the eternal ideal. The church would eventually appropriate this view and make the ideal heaven and declare the church heaven on earth, carefully blocking our view of the corruptible world around us with its stained glass windows. Claiming to have the keys to heaven and eternal life, the secular was denounced as a place of corruption, sin, and death. If heaven is good as represented by the church, then it follows that secular is bad. I would argue that it is a false dichotomy. Every aspect of our culture is of human creation. That culture, including its institutions, is as good and bad, earthly and transcendent, sacred and profane as we are. That said, human society has always been divided between the sacred and profane, or the sacred and secular, and it has been experienced as an ongoing power struggle. I could give you countless examples from all the great religions, but I think I'll stick to what I know best. The Christian story began as a subversive, nonviolent force against the oppression of the Roman Empire. It was the religion of the weakest in society. Since there were lots of oppressed poor, it grew at a fantastic rate. It became so great in numbers, the secular powers felt a need to co-opt it. When Constantine made it the official religion of Rome in 313, Christianity developed a fondness for power. Once meeting in secret in catacombs, after 313 it moved above ground, building basilicas modeled after the emperor's palaces. Once mocking power by giving the emperor's titles to the peasant Jewish preacher they worshipped, the church took on the trappings of the royal court. It isn't an accident that bishops wear purple, Caesar's color of choice. Once the victims of persecution, they persecuted and exiled those that disagreed with them. It went downhill from there. For a millennium, it paid off. Excuse me. Oops, try some water on it. For a millennium, it paid off. After the fall of Rome, the church was ideally positioned to fill the power vacuum. The sacred and the secular worlds essentially became one and the same. We called it Christendom. While there were many holy and good people amongst its numbers who hearkened back to what Jesus had been about, the institution solidified its power as the number one secular power. But there were other forces at work in the world. Galileo and Copernicus were both good Christian faithful, but their discoveries were a threat to power. They proved it was impossible to believe, before or after breakfast, the accepted dogma that the earth was the center of the universe. While the church did what it could to silence them, the cat was out of the bag, and its influence beyond its stained glass windows began to diminish. The church revamped its theology and said if the earth was not the center of the universe, humankind was at the center of creation. A few centuries later, Darwin made a hash of that position, claiming that too was impossible to believe, further diminishing the church's influence. Again, the church scurried to find a new position, saying if humankind was not the purpose of creation, then surely the human soul was. When Freud came along with his theories of the id, ego, and superego, that too was trashed. Those scientific views, along with the divisive Reformation, the bloodletting of religious wars, the Inquisition, the corruption within the church itself, and most importantly, the Enlightenment, formed the perfect storm that knocked the church out of secular power, maybe for good. I say maybe because power is addictive. Those that have had it, rarely accept its loss without a good fight, even here in predominantly secular New Zealand. I have only been in New Zealand for 2.5 years, and already I have entered into 3 conflicts about keeping the church and state separate, all of which have gotten some media attention. The first instance centered on a situation in a public school where a parent objected to having prayer in school assemblies. The parent was a Christian, but was married to a Chinese Buddhist. They were raising their mixed cultured children to appreciate both faiths and objected in a letter to the editor to only Christian prayer being said in their daughter's public supported institution. I was appalled and wrote a letter to the editor in support of the parents. If I had any letters in support of my position, they were not published. But some very harsh ones, critical of my views, were. I later met with the parent to look for ways to challenge this common occurrence of New Zealand's state-supported schools. I learned that her young daughter suffered harassment from other students